Welcome to another episode of Mental Health Mondays, where we talk to guests who are either professionals in the mental health space, uh, mental health advocates, or guests who have lived with or experienced a mental health challenge. And just as a reminder, if you are watching this on YouTube, please make sure you hit that subscribe button. And throughout this, if it is helpful, make sure you share also. I bring on guests purposely so that we can get information out to the masses. So we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button and share with all your friends, because it generally, we give out a lot of really great information. So without further ado, I am going to bring up my next guest, Phil, and I'll let him tell you a little bit about himself. So welcome so much, Phil. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, Kelly. Thank you very much for having me on. Thank you.
Absolutely. So tell the audience a little bit about yourself and where are you coming from?
So I'm about 25 miles from London, over in the UK.
Awesome.
And it's nice and sunny here today. Very hot.
That's awesome. I'm in Denver, so it's actually overcast today for the first day, but we've been hitting in the hundreds lately, so overcast is okay.
Nice cooler day.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit more about your story and your journey.
Yeah, so I suppose in terms of a setting, I'm in my mid-50s. I'm married with 2 teenage children. And I started life as what they call a management accountant, so working in industry. In fact, one of the companies I worked for is Caterpillar, a big US-based company dealing with all earth-moving equipment and stuff. But I did various different projects abroad and a whole stack of things. I was in finance for about 15 years. And then I moved into, over here, what's called the recruitment industry. And I think things work slightly different here than they do there. There's lots of recruitment agencies here. So candidates come to us looking for jobs, and clients hire us to find the right person for them. And it's very, very hectic. I worked in the recruitment industry for about 12 years, and it's one of those industries where you're kind of paid commission only, like a sales related activity. And I got into it mainly from the point of view of I was looking for a job myself after having left the Caterpillar organisation. And the person who was going to recruit me said, well, do you want to work in recruitment? So I thought, well, I'm looking for a job, I'll give it a go. So ended up spending 12 years there, and I started recruiting individuals and then teams, and eventually got into outsourcing, where companies sort of outsource their entire HR, human resources function. And they were quite big projects, so lots of different deadlines. Over here in public sector, I'm not quite sure if the same happens in the States, but over here, any public money has to be, that's raised by taxation and stuff, is kind of spent on behalf of the public. And so they have to have lots of different tender processes. So my role in life was basically lots of different deadlines for tenders, lots of different delivery, deadline after deadline after deadline after deadline, and just really, really hectic. So I used to work quite late nights, dealing with candidates because they were at home those times, getting in early in the office because that's when clients were mainly free first thing. And then just to keep on top of things, working at weekends. And so as a consequence, I'd be sort of out of the door in the morning at maybe 5:36, and sometimes didn't get back till maybe 8, 9, 10 at night. And so the early years of my children, I sort of missed a lot of their growing up. And I got to a stage where I was enjoying what I was doing because it was all adrenaline rush, and it's great to feel sort of productive and being successful and sort of seeing the monetary rewards of what you do, which were great. but I didn't see my family. And I got headhunted by a competitor. And moving across to this competitor, I thought would be a great move. And unfortunately, it was probably the worst move I could have ever made. It was very disorganized. The person who I was reporting to went on maternity leave about 3 months early. So I didn't really get a handover. And the company had taken on a project at Christmas time to provide an awful lot of staff to one particular organisation over here. And all the systems were new, but they all fell over. So all the project people who should have been working with me, unfortunately, ended up working on this project to recover it. And then latterly, they had a redundancy program as a consequence of all the money they'd lost on this project. And so my team of 15 was taken down to about 3 of us. And so as a consequence, I was kind of trying to handle all the work, dealing with the things that were needed, trying to protect the 2 ladies who worked with me as well. And so again, I put my foot down on the accelerator, on the throttle, and just tried to, blast through all the challenges. And as a consequence, I was working probably about 18, 20 hours a day, just coming home, having a shower and going back again. And that lasted probably for about 6 months. And then I just hit the proverbial brick wall completely. And I got up one morning, my wife was ironing a shirt, helping me to get out the door to go and catch a train. And I could feel my heart, felt like it was going to pound out of my chest. And my arms went all heavy, like they were made of lead. And my wife's a nurse, and she said, "Oh my goodness, you're having a heart attack." So very thankfully, she phoned for paramedics. I do have a heart condition, so I thought myself I was having a heart attack. Paramedics came in, took me away to hospital, and it turned out not to be a heart attack. It was just a huge, huge panic attack, which I'd never had before. But I ended up having to stay in hospital, and the doctor who saw me said, you've marginally just missed having a heart attack, but you've completely got to change how you're living your life. And I kind of said, well, yeah, okay, I'll give it a go. And he said, no, if you don't do it, you'll be dead. So that was a real wake-up call. And I came out of hospital, kind of thought I knew better. I kind of thought, well, I've been under a lot of stress and it should be okay. And so I tried to go back to work and just couldn't. And what I found was on the day when I felt like I was having a heart attack, it felt like my head had exploded. It just felt like my head had completely exploded internally, imploded, I should say. And I found myself in a mental health day unit. I had to be put into a hospital where I could come home at night. And I was there for a couple of weeks, where normally you would expect somebody to recover over a progressive period of time. And I did the things of, colouring in the drawings and, listening to music and a whole stack of other things. Unfortunately, it didn't kind of work for me. So it helped maybe calm me down a bit. But I then went on some weird escapade and ended up, I left home. I bought a load of stuff. I spent our life savings on stuff we just didn't need. I bought 3 cars, a van, 2 motorbikes, just wasted our money completely. I went missing and my wife had to get the police out looking for me as well. And that was probably over a period of about 3 months, 4 months. So it was quite a long period of time. And when I eventually sort of calmed down a little bit, because I was kind of on a high. And I think part of the feeling of being on a high is that I hadn't died. A lot of people, when they've had a kind of a near-death experience, just have this euphoria, the fact that they're still here. And you kind of try and change the way you live. But I'd gone sort of from normality, kind of up to about 30,000 feet. And then after that, it felt like the plane had sort of just crash landed, and I headed into just a major depression, which I'd never done before, but it's a horrendous, horrible place. And there was a period of about 6 months where I just didn't want to be here. And it's a really weird feeling. It felt like my family would be better off without me being here, which is, I can't explain it. I don't describe it very well. I can just explain it as being, like a living hell for every single day, not wanting to be here. And it was kind of my faith, my family, and my friends who kind of kept me going. And eventually, after seeing the professionals for a period of time, they diagnosed me as being bipolar, which, for your sort of viewers and listeners, in the olden days, they used to call it manic depressive disorder. And it was kind of, you were either, like I said, up here, or you were kind of completely down there. So the reason why it's called bipolar is you're at sort of one end of the spectrum or the other. And the medication that they prescribe is something called mood stabilizers. So it's to prevent you going up here, prevent you going down there, and to keep you kind of fairly level. And so since then, I've been on this daily medication, mood stabilizers, which have worked really, really well. I still have periodic times when I'm a little bit too up, a little bit too down, but generally speaking, I'm okay now. So yeah, that's kind of my experience of both having, I suppose in the old days, it would be called a breakdown. These days, I guess we tend to refer to it as burnout.
Mm.
It's a much more used term these days. And sort of subsequently being diagnosed as bipolar. So a long story, but that's how I became, a real advocate for mental health, mental well-being, and all the different things that I kind of support over in the UK to do with improving mental health. Over here, we've certainly had a lack of funding. All the funding tends to be seen in the physical health side, and less so in the mental health side. Things are starting to change, but it really needs radical change, I think, because so many people as well have been affected by the pandemic. My own children have been affected by the pandemic as well, with having to work away from school and the various different activities that they'd normally be involved with, just being shut in at home, similar to what you've experienced in the States.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, incredible journey. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I mean, like you said, it probably is more called burnout at this point, but you hit a wall, which people oftentimes do when they're going. And then so I know that you were ultimately diagnosed with bipolar, but was it really truly a manic state? Or do you think that like you almost went into psychosis, or was that even a conversation that was brought up?
I did experience psychosis. So in terms of the manic period I had, there was a period of time, very, very weird feeling. I felt like my house was falling down, or I should say going to fall down. And there was no rationale for that. There was no reasoning for it. I don't know where that came from. But every day it felt like my house was going to start moving and shaking and start falling down. So I started plans to move. which was a really weird situation because none of us wanted to move. My children don't want to move. My wife didn't want to move. So yeah, that was a very strange situation. I felt like I was. Sorry, my dog's scratching to get out.
No worries.
Sorry about that.
No, all good.
Sorry about that.
We like animals, so you're good.
She's heard my story too many times. In fact, she was part of my therapy. We got her to sort of help in terms of getting out and about and getting out in nature for dog walks and things. But yeah, coming back to the psychosis, there were several things that happened. And I'm not quite sure whether it's associated with my beliefs anyway. I'm a Christian. We go to church locally. My wife sings in the choir at church. But I had like these religious experiences, which were very, very bizarre. It was, I went on a walk once, or several times, I should say, around our village, which isn't a huge place. And I would talk to everybody that I met, which again was quite strange. I'm quite a personable kind of guy, and I normally say good morning to people, but I would actually stop and talk to them. And it was really weird because for some reason I would ask them their name. And it was like the names of all the disciples. So that was very strange. And it felt as if I was kind of living a life that wasn't my own, if that makes any sense. There was a lot of times when I was sort of feeling, I suppose you'd call it like an out-of-body experience. When somebody feels like they're actually watching themselves. So I had a period of time when it felt very much like that. So yeah, some very strange feelings, but obviously a lot of people have experienced psychosis far worse. And I think I was probably fairly lucky with regards to my experiences.
So did you, it just makes me really curious. Had you had any other symptoms or anything prior to this breakdown? Was there any signs throughout your life?
I think one of the things for me that it did was enable me to put in place some jigsaw puzzle pieces, which I hadn't really thought about before. And so I lost my mother. My brother and I lost our mother when I was about 12. So we were brought up by our grandparents in a completely different place, completely different setting, which with hindsight was, not that I'm pleased that my mum passed away, but living with another generation was a real blessing from the point of view of the things we learned, the stories that my granddad and my grandmother were able to tell us, and my auntie as well, who's only 3 years older than me. But at that point, when my mum passed away, I had a period of not really depression of being suicidal, but just down. And it was sort of rationalised as a consequence of obviously my mum passing away. Later in life, when I worked for the kind of Caterpillar organisation, the predecessor of Caterpillar having taken them over, I worked for them for about 12 years, an engine manufacturer. But I had a period of time when, again, there were lots of different things happening all at the same time. So the company got taken over. I had a job change. All the systems had to change. And a friend of mine who looked after all the systems very sadly took his own life as a consequence of stress and pressure and a personal experience that happened between him and his wife. And so there was all these different facets of things that happened. And I kind of had like I suppose you'd call it like a mini burnout there, where I just felt overwhelmed with everything that was going on. And I'd been, again, working silly hours. I'd been trying to work my way through all these challenges. And it sort of ended up, I was married before, and it over a period of time, it kind of eroded my marriage. So unfortunately, we ended up divorcing. And just coming back to your question, I think looking back, there were possibly times that maybe indicated that I could have been bipolar. But and in the recruitment industry, one of the things that the medical people had said is sometimes bipolar is one of those things that's kind of masked by some of the things that you may do, particularly as a career. And they were saying that when you work in a very hectic organisation or hectic role, I should say, and you feel a bit euphoric every day, you feel like you want to do more, you feel like you're on the go all the time, that actually that's kind of masking you almost being hypermanic, like almost manic, but not quite there. And so maybe, times when I would have a bonus payment, for instance, we would save some of it, but we would spend out on various different things, some of which we probably didn't need. And so it's always a bit of a query, I suppose. I have a query in my own mind, and I know the medical people have a query about whether I was bipolar before, because a lot of people are born bipolar. But I kind of gather that when somebody has quite a traumatic experience, which kind of could be just something that's unique to them, or could be just being overwhelmed by lots of different things, as I became, that it can kind of almost trigger you into certainly a bipolar episode, and maybe makes you kind of enhanced whatever was there before. So I'm not 100% sure myself, and I've kind of yet to speak to anybody who can really kind of 100% say, yes, I was either bipolar all the time, or yes, it was definitely this kind of experience I had.
Yeah, I know. I mean, what I have learned over time also is that bipolar is one diagnosis that's really, really hard to diagnose because there's so many different layers in there. As far as you have that depression, you have the manic state, you could potentially have psychosis. It's like it encompasses so many different mental health challenges that it can be hard to, or later in life it's diagnosed versus early in life. So yeah, that makes absolute sense for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I gather, having sort of looked into it since, that it's often misdiagnosed as well. As you said, lots of people get treated just purely for depression. Some people get sort of misdiagnosed with borderline personality disorder. So yeah, it can sometimes be difficult to sort of pin down, I think.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is I've also heard that it's been misdiagnosed, right? Like they say you're bipolar, but then you're not really. And so yeah, it's one of those like trial and error things, unfortunately, because it presents in so many different ways that it's hard to diagnose. And then you kind of have to go with that one diagnosis and see if what treatments are going to help or what medication might help. And then if it doesn't, then they kind of end up, at least professionals, they start shifting to different or looking at different illnesses or diagnosis. So yeah, it can definitely be challenging.
It's interesting what you mentioned there about the medication. Originally, I didn't want to take medication. Hello. Dogs come back in here.
Oh no.
to
There.
who passed away.
You kind of froze for a minute. Uh-oh. Hopefully you'll come back here in a second. His camera froze just for a moment, so hopefully Phil will come back here in a moment. And I know the connection between us. There we go. Okay, now you're back. You froze for just a moment, so.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
That must have been the dog coming back in again. Yeah, there was a period of time when I didn't want to take medication originally. And my wife, being a nurse, persuaded me quite rightly to sort of go and take medication. But there was quite a long period of time of trying to find the right medication. A little bit like trial and error, where you would kind of be prescribed one set of medication and maybe it would make you kind of too tired. There was, one set of medication I was on where literally I was pretty much asleep all day. And then I couldn't sleep, like a period of insomnia, which is horrible. Anybody who suffers from it, my heart goes out to you because it's a horrible experience. And so there was lots of trial and error of different medication until we identified the one that kind of really suits me. And I gather that that's quite a common experience, particularly with bipolar. I guess it is for lots of other mental health related disorders. But for me especially, there seemed to be just a long period of time of trying to just find the right mix that worked for me. Thankfully, we found it in the end.
Yeah, I mean, even in the US, I know that I have heard several people have gone through the same experience of really that trial and error with medication. And something that I always remind people is just make sure you advocate for yourself, advocate for your loved ones. If it doesn't feel right and it's not working how you feel like it should be working, like you're sleeping all the time or you're awake all the time or whatever that might be, just make sure that you're really truly advocating for yourself or for your loved one, depending on the age, of course. And I know that, so I am curious of if somebody that may be going through a similar experience like you have, is there any like thoughts or tips or tricks or anything that you like to tell people?
Yeah, I think from kind of the experiences that I had and the mistakes that I made along the way, I think one thing that I would always recommend to anybody, whether you feel like you're experiencing something or not, is to confide or have a conversation either with your partner or your parents or one of your siblings, just to talk about, if anything did happen. And quite often, we'll talk in advance about, if we said to some friends, if we were involved in an accident, would you look after the children? And we had an arrangement put in place. Not because we were thinking we were going to have an accident, but we had the children's best interest at heart. We over here, it's called a will. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
It's called a will. Yeah.
Yep. Same. Yep.
People make a will. People plan their taxes. People plan most things, but not many people plan if anything happened to them from a mental health perspective. So I would always recommend sort of having a full and frank conversation, an open and honest conversation, which quite often can lead into mentioning other things, particularly around maybe if you have relatives, for instance, who've experienced something in the past that you've never spoken about before to your siblings or your sort of partner or whoever it is that you're closest to. it's something, again, that we don't tend to talk about. So certainly that's one thing I would always recommend. The other thing I think is to always just kind of be mindful of things that can potentially lead you down an avenue of just becoming overstressed. Pressure is great because we feel energized, we feel like we're, living life to the full. But when it tips over to that stress situation, I think, hopefully these days we will recognize things like better nutrition, getting out into nature, having more exercise, all those things that are just sensible from a physical health point of view are also sensible from a mental health perspective as well. So I think I would always say to people, even if you don't feel stressed, try and do as many of those things as you can, because it's just better for you. It makes you feel better physically, it makes you feel better mentally. And I think for those people who hit a brick wall and find that they've been overwhelmed, stressed, if they feel like they've burnt out, again, confide in somebody, tell somebody how you're feeling before maybe you hit that brick wall. Seek some sort of medical advice from your doctor, your general practitioner over here, somebody who is more knowledgeable than yourself, who can guide you away from maybe burning out fully, or who can give you advice in terms of things that you can do differently. And certainly that thing of self-care, we all sort of have self-care about our physical well-being. You wouldn't walk out in the street when cars are coming, hopefully. You wouldn't, do dangerous things that are physically going to scar you and cause you problems. And yet we put ourselves through so many things, whether it be career, personal-wise, that eventually can damage not only your physical health, but your mental health as well. We're all built to deal with stress, that saber-toothed tiger thing, the fight-flight scenario. And our bodies, our minds are, designed to work in that way, to fend off certain things. But when you find yourself feeling stressed every day, ongoing, your body's not designed for that. And so I would always say to somebody, if you feel that that's happening to you, that's the time to know to do something different. And that could be something that's just very simple, like having a less sort of stressful commute into work. Maybe doing something outside of work that just takes your mind away from work. Or it could be something reasonably radical. It could be something where you need to change your job into something that's less stressful, or just something you should enjoy work. It shouldn't be stressful all the time. And so if you find that you're stressed out all the time, particularly through a work scenario, it's really time to ask yourself, would you rather be here next year, or just continue and have maybe that extra bonus, or that car that you want? Ask yourself what your true values and your true beliefs are. And I think if somebody does that, it can make you realize that there's so many things in life that you don't need, and so many things that we chase after, mostly material things. But actually, when you get to a stage when you feel like you're going to pass away, when you feel like your sort of life has exploded, none of those material things matter. It's all about the relationships you have. It's about strength and the beauty of those relationships, and those relationships with those people who can help. So yeah, I would say to everybody, always have a plan for your life, but review it And if you find that you're being massively stressed out all the time, it's time for a change.
I mean, you just said that all really great. And I know some of the key pieces really, at least what BCC Evolution does too, is we built a safety and self-care plan. So it's part of our curriculum of breaking the cycle of trauma, that you can actually fill it out and have those things for you when needed. And then also, if you are super stressed out in your work environment, maybe it's time for a change. It could be that small change or that big change. And I know personally, I've gone through that before. After I lost my middle sister to completed suicide, I was just going, going, going. And that's how I was coping. And I hit that, I hit that wall like you did. And it was like, oh, wow, okay. You can't sustain that stress and your body can't really sustain that. So how do we transition out of that? And so I think you just, I mean, hit it right on the head as far as all of those points. And it's global. Like, this is not just a US thing. This is not just a UK thing, right? This is a global epidemic, and we need to start having these hard conversations. And hopefully everybody listening, you're hearing the same things over and over. And the great part is that nobody's alone. We all experience in this. We all have our own journeys. And I really appreciate you coming on and sharing yours. And those were some amazing words of wisdom. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Thank you for inviting me. And love your show.
Thank you. I appreciate you. And we'll definitely keep in contact, because I love all my friends in the UK. So thank you.
We love you guys as well.
Thanks. All right, y'all. That was another amazing Mental Health Mondays episode. You heard it from Phil, and I know that I just repeated what he said, and I really think that it's important to evaluate where you're at. Where's your stress level? How is work affecting it? Is family affecting it? Whatever it might be. And keep in mind, whatever you may or may not be experiencing, I mean, it could be a potential mental health challenge. It may not be, but take a little bit deeper look into what's happening in your life, how you're feeling, and do you want to be here next year? Is it worth whatever's happening at that point? Are you super stressed out, or whatever it might be? So I love all that. I feel like I'm going to have to go back and rewatch this, just because I think that he gave us some incredible tools, some incredible, his journey just front to back. And sometimes we hit those walls, and sometimes we need some help, and it's okay to not be okay. And it's also okay to share your journey. So again, Mental Health Mondays, if you haven't watched it before, we talk to guests who are either professionals in the mental health space, those that are mental health advocates, and have lived or experienced a mental health challenge. So make sure you hit that subscribe button below so that you don't miss any more episodes. And keep in mind, BCC Evolution is a 501c3 nonprofit, and all of our education is helped through our audience and all of those that support us. So if you become a warrior for mental health, you get this cool shirt with only a $20 donation or more per month. If you do $45 or more per month, then you actually get a shirt and a really cool tumbler. So go to bccevolution.org and sign up as a warrior for mental health today, and you'll help us bring more and more education globally centered around mental health and suicide. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next Monday at 11 a.m.